right, everybody, welcome back to Anti-War Radio, chaosradioaustin.org, also streaming from antiwar.com/radio. I'm Scott Horton, and introducing our guest today, Dr. Ron Paul. He represents District 14 on the Gulf Coast of Texas in the U.S. House of Representatives. Of course, he writes for us at antiwar.com. His archives are antiwar.com/Paul, including his new one that we ran yesterday, Just Say No to the Draft. And, of course, ran for president last year and did a great job teaching people all about peace and liberty. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Thanks, Scott. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
That's great. It's good to talk to you again. I guess the first thing I want to ask you about is the news that Barack Obama has approved the sending of 17,000 more troops to Afghanistan. You did originally vote for the resolution for the attack on Afghanistan, isn't that right?
Well, the resolution never said, I don't believe it had the word Afghanistan in it, and it was authority to go after those individuals who were responsible for 9/11. So it was rather specific on what who the target should be, but it was never for taking over. You know, the resolution that dealt with Iraq was much more specific. The one for that he could use authority to go into Iraq. This one was generalized to go after those who were responsible for 9/11, but never once was an implication, oh, yeah, this is the authority you need to occupy Afghanistan and go into nation building and protect oil lines, all that kind of stuff. That wasn't there, but that is right. I did vote for the authority to go after al-Qaeda.
So at this point, is it not, or is it clearly the legal case that Barack Obama does not really have the authority to expand this war without some sort of new resolution by the Congress?
Well, that's right. I mean, he never had the authority to take over this country, invade it, and occupy it. But indirectly, he gets the authority because Congress keeps voting the money, you know, and that's some of the legal people say, well, no, it's not new authority, but Congress gives them the money, so it's an implied authority. That's why we should have all been much more cautious over the years. The Congresses should have been dealing with any type of war. There should never be war unless there's a declaration of war. Then it's very, very clear. But presidents do it, and the Congress goes along with it, and they don't assume responsibility that they should be doing, and then we end up with this. So they don't even come back. That's true. I mean, technically, Obama should be asking, you know, am I allowed to expand the war? It's not declared. But how many troops are we allowed to put in there? Well, it looks like whatever the president says. And that, to me, is a tragic way to run foreign policy.
What, if any, do you think is still the mission in Afghanistan?
Well, I think it still has a lot to do with natural resources and pipelines and you know, strategic areas of the world like that. Others would argue with me and say, oh, no, that's not it. It's just this neocon philosophy that we have to spread our goodness around the world. I don't think they can describe their precise goals themselves. They're not saying, well, if we go in there and we achieve this in 24 months, then it's going to be all over. I think from what I can tell what they're doing, it's a permanent presence, just like in Iraq. They're not going to be leaving Iraq. There's no way they'll be leaving Iraq in 16 months. And Obama has been pretty honest about Afghanistan all along in the campaign. He said he would put more troops in Afghanistan, and the people voted for him. So it's one of those things where people aren't even on our wavelength on what type of military activity we should be engaged in around the world, and I'm just hoping that we can get some new people involved and another generation that'll wake up and say enough is enough. But also on our side of that argument will be the fact that these kind of interventionist policies overseas, they come to an end when the countries go broke, and we're on the verge of that. So who knows, Scott? We may have our way before we know it.
Yeah, well, there's the easy way and the hard way. It seems like maybe we're already have already chosen the latter there. Well, so let me ask you: if you had been the president, if you'd been elected and you were the president, would you have any mission remaining in Afghanistan, Pakistan? Of course, it kind of goes without saying that as long as Osama bin Laden has not been brought to justice, that the mission there is open-ended, nation building aside, or oil pipelines aside.
No, I said many times in the campaign, just come home. We just marched into these countries. We can just march out. I'd come home from the whole Middle East. I'd come home from Europe. I'd come home from Korea. I'd come home from Japan, save a lot of money. But you say, well, what about this target? What if the evidence is really there, like they claim that Al Qaeda and bin Laden are responsible? Should we totally ignore it? Although obviously our foreign policy was a precipitating factor, it's pretty hard to say, well, he just killed 3,000 Americans. We don't care about him and let him go. But we should, at least make an attempt to do it within the law, which means that if we knew he was in Pakistan, maybe we could ask the Pakistani government, can we go in? But we don't need to go in with these armed forces. I'm sure you recall my proposal back then was not to send the army in, but to revive the old idea of the letter of marque and reprisal.
Right.
If we have an enemy of 25 people, do we declare war against the Muslim world? It makes no sense. Why don't we go after the ringleaders and target those individuals? And to me, I think that's why the founders were rather wise in giving us that option where you don't have to declare war against an entire country if you're dealing with a bunch of thugs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course that didn't get anywhere. Instead, everyone opted for the authorization, which I guess, as you said, the language you thought at the time was specific enough that it was about the individuals, not overthrowing Afghanistan's pseudo-government and replacing it with another pseudo-government. But it was narrow enough to satisfy you then.
Right.
Do you regret that they've taken such advantage of something that you did vote for?
I don't like it at all. But and I didn't even like it then, and that's why I immediately followed up trying to get people interested in saying, well, yes, I can't totally say. It's sort of like, Pearl Harbor. What do? Our policies, had a lot to do with antagonizing the Japanese. I mean, when you put an embargo on a country, in a way it's an act of war. But you say, they bombed Pearl Harbor, it was our fault, so we don't do anything. You still have to, by that time you have to sort of defend yourself and against, innocent people getting killed. But that was the reason I introduced the bill to emphasize letter of marque and reprisal, that they wouldn't do that they could still target the enemy, but in a very, very narrow sense. And I think the evidence to show that they weren't really all that interested in getting bin Laden was the fact that militarily they probably had him about captured and they walked away, at Tora Bora. So maybe they like the idea of having him out there in the wilderness someplace because they can always use him as the enemy that we have to fear and the reason why we have to be over there. And even though they're claiming we're over there to go after him, they're really over there to deal with gas and oil pipelines and the whole Middle East situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now let me ask you about gas and oil pipelines from the point of view of ex-make-believe oil company. It makes a lot of sense to me, I guess, economically speaking, to invest money in lobbying and influencing the Congress to help secure your pipeline route through some Central Asian country nobody's ever heard of in order to protect it. But I know you're an economist and you're a Texas Republican and you know about how oil markets work. I guess, a lot of those oil companies have Texas City, right, is all full of oil. That's part of your congressional district. Can you address the issue of whether that's necessary, that America, because I think a lot of people would say, they say it's for democracy, but really we need that oil. We need our Marines over there to secure those oil pipeline routes, or else, something bad will happen.
Well, I don't believe it. If that were the case, Japan would be awfully concerned and have a huge navy and a military and say, hey, look, we don't have any oil in Japan. The only way we can have oil is we have to invade and occupy and steal the oil from somebody. They just go to Amsterdam and buy it, and they get all the oil that they need. And what would these people do with their oil if we weren't there trying to control their governments? What if we didn't have a puppet government in Saudi Arabia? Somebody would have the oil, and it wouldn't be any good to them unless they sold it. So the motivation would be to sell it to us. But by the time the time you add up all the cost of the military operations and the cost in American lives in order to pursue this policy, it makes our oil very, very expensive.